She felt the moment the choice broke the sky. The battlefield below was a black river of steel and steam. Men choking on blood and mud beneath a sky the color of old iron. Her horse did not touch the ground. It rode the storm, hooves pounding on thunder itself as she circled above the carnage, scanning the dying with eyes that had learned to see more than wounds. She was supposed to look for one thing: worthiness, not courage alone, not strength alone, but that strange combination of resolve, defiance, and cold clarity that marked a soul destined for Valhalla. For centuries she had obeyed that command without question. Today, she hesitated. The man she had been sent for lay near the broken banner pole, his chest torn open, his hand still wrapped around a sword that refused to fall. Odin had marked him days ago. She had felt the pull, the whisper in the wind, the command wrapped in the storm. This one, bring me this one. But she saw another. He was not the strongest, not the fiercest, not the leader. A young warrior half buried under the bodies of his companions. Eyes wide with the raw animal terror of someone watching life slip away grain by grain. He had thrown himself in front of a spear meant for a child, a boy who now knelt beside him, shaking, trying to push his intestines back into his body with hands too small to understand what they were touching. The boy would live, the man would not. She watched his lips form a prayer, not to Odin, not to any of the gods that demanded glory and iron, but to no one at all, a desperate, wordless plea to simply not die alone. Something in that silence struck her deeper than the shouted names of gods. She heard no thunder mark on him, no command in the wind, no order in her blood. Odin had not chosen him, which meant, strictly speaking, she was not allowed to. Her sisters rode nearby, streaks of cold light across the sky, each one following a path older than their names. They were not supposed to interfere with one another's choices, but all of them answered to the same will. The Allfather did not need to shout. His intention lived in the bones of the world. She could feel it even now, like a hand on the back of her neck, turning her gaze toward the man by the banner pole, the chosen one, the right soul, the useful weapon for whatever war Odin was already planning beyond this one. She dipped lower, wind tearing at her hair, cloak whipping behind her like the wing of some great night bird. The chosen warrior coughed once, blood spraying in an arc that steamed on the cold air, and then his eyes rolled back. She was almost there. All she had to do was reach down, touch his chest, and pull his spirit out like drawing a blade from a sheath. She had done it 1,000 times. It should have been simple. But his soul no longer called to her. It was already dimming, slipping toward that gray space where even gods lost interest. The choice had been made hours earlier, when he had ordered the burning of a village that posed no threat simply because it was easier to destroy than to spare. The Norns had watched. The threads had shifted. Odin still wanted him. The Valkyrie did not. Her horse screamed, a high, piercing sound only the dead and the dying could hear, and veered. Not toward the chosen, but toward the man beneath the bodies. The air thickened around her. The sky itself seemed to resist. "This is not the one," the storm said. "This is not the name carved into the roots of the world." She ignored it. She dismounted without touching the ground, her feet landing on a rock slick with blood, her presence bending the light around her. The boy did not see her. The dying man did. His eyes widened, not in fear, but in a tired kind of astonishment, as if some old childhood story whispered at the edge of his memory had stepped out of the shadow. She knelt beside him, her armor barely shimmering, her hand hovering just above his chest. "You were not chosen," the wind hissed. She heard instead the rattle in his lungs, the way his fingers twitched as he tried to hold on to a life he no longer believed he deserved. She thought of all the warriors she had taken who gloried in blood for its own sake, who killed because they were bored, who prayed loudly on the morning of battle and laughed while villages burned at night. They had been called worthy because they were useful. This man had tried to stand between a weapon and a child. Odin had not noticed, or had noticed and dismissed it. She made the choice herself. When she touched his chest, the world flinched. His soul tore free with a sound like old wood splitting in winter, a rough, reluctant crack that echoed somewhere beyond the sky. For one heartbeat, she felt the gaze of the Allfather turn fully toward her, as if the sun had become an eye and focused all its light on the back of her skull. The man's last breath left his body with a strange calm. The boy's sobs became a distant thing, muffled beneath the roar of something ancient and displeased. She lifted the soul gently, cradling it as if it were a wounded bird. For a moment she thought perhaps she had misunderstood. Perhaps Odin would approve. Perhaps mercy had a place in his plans that she simply did not yet see. Then the ravens came. They did not descend like ordinary birds. The air around her suddenly filled with black shapes that were not quite physical, shadows with feathers, wings edged in memory instead of bone. Hugin and Munin were only the most famous of their kind. There were others, lesser messengers, eyes that had watched the world since before men learned to name their fears. They circled her once, twice, silently. Then one passed so close its wing brushed her cheek. The contact burned like cold iron. She heard no words, but the meaning was unmistakable. Disobedience noted, judgment reserved, punishment coming. She almost dropped the soul. Somewhere above the clouds, in a hall no mortal could reach without dying, a single thread shivered on the great loom where the Norns wove the fates of gods and men alike. It was not the thread of the man she had taken, his had already been fraying. It was her own. A golden line, bright and taut, that had once seemed invincible. Now a thin shadow crossed it, as if something had marked it for later cutting. She did not see this. Valkyries did not watch their own destinies being woven, but she felt it. A weight settled in her ribs where no blade could ever reach. By the time she reached the edge of Valhalla, the sky had gone strangely quiet. Normally, when she approached with a newly taken soul, the air vibrated with distant shouts, the clash of weapons, the mad, joyous roar of warriors who died every day and rose again with renewed hunger for battle. This time, the sound seemed muted, as if the hall itself were listening. She delivered the man to the threshold, placing his soul among countless others who had arrived shaking. Disoriented, terrified, only to be seized by the intoxication of eternal combat. He looked around, confusion turning into awe. She did not speak to him. She rarely spoke to any of them. She turned to leave, expecting to vanish back into the storm. The doors did not open for her. They remained shut, great slabs of carved wood and bone inlaid with scenes of battles older than memory. The images on them shifted as she watched ancient wars rearranging themselves into new patterns, as if even history itself were being edited in response to what she had done. A voice spoke, not aloud, but inside the part of her that had once been mortal and had almost forgotten it. "You bring me what I did not ask for." It was not angry. That would have been easier. Anger, she understood. This was worse. It was disappointment shaped into sound, the quiet displeasure of someone who believed himself unquestionable and had just been contradicted. She fell to one knee out of reflex more than respect. Her armor creaked like ice under strain. "I brought you a soul that deserved more than the dirt," she thought, but she did not say it. There were limits even to her courage. The sky darkened further. The ravens appeared again, perched now on the antlered helmets of warriors who could not see them. One hopped down, landing on the stone directly in front of her. Its eyes were not the eyes of a bird. They were old, human, and utterly without pity. "You forget your place," the gaze seemed to say. "You choose as if you were a god." Far away beyond the walls of Valhalla there were other halls whose doors she had never entered. Folkvanger, where Freyja gathered the dead she favored. Hell, where those who died in fear or sickness drifted into a colder kind of eternity. There were places below even that, shadows under shadows, where beings older than the Aesir whispered about balances that must be maintained. When a Valkyrie disobeyed, the consequences did not fall only on her. They rippled outward, unbalancing carefully arranged scales. Odin did not tolerate imbalance unless he had caused it himself. The punishment would not come now, she knew. The Allfather rarely struck in the moment. He preferred to let fear grow roots. She would be allowed to ride again, to choose again, to feel the weight of every decision pressed against the memory of this one. She would wonder every time she dismounted whether this was the day he would call her name, not as his hand in the world, but as a transgressor. She left Valhalla that day with a new shadow stitched to her heels. The other Valkyries did not speak of it. They had all felt the shift in the wind. They'd all seen the ravens circling lower than usual. The Sagas would never tell this story. Poets did not like to speak of gods being defied, unless the defiance ended in a lesson that made the god look more just, more wise, more inevitable. They would write of Valkyries as glorious shield maidens in the sky, shining and terrible, agents of destiny without desires of their own. They would not write of the rules that bound them. They would never mention the punishments reserved for those who broke those rules. But the old stories, the ones whispered at the edge of firelight, long after the skalds had gone to sleep, hinted at fallen maidens. Wings burned away, cast down into mortal bodies as penance. They hinted at unseen prisons where once radiant beings walked in circles too small for flight. They hinted at tears turned to frost on the inside of a helmet where no one could see them. The truth is simple. and terrible. Odin's power over the Valkyries did not end at command. It extended into punishment, into shaping their fates, with the same ruthless precision he applied to men. To understand how dark those punishments could be, we have to step back from the battlefield and into the architecture of their existence to see what a Valkyrie was allowed to be, and what she was forced to become when she stopped obeying. She had been created for obedience long before she understood what obedience meant. Valkyries were not born the way humans were, bursting into the world in blood and breath. They were forged, each one shaped from storms, from the screams of dying warriors, from the shimmering boundary between life and death where souls still trembled before choosing direction. Odin took these raw materials and molded them into beings that could see what men could not: the weight of courage, the thread of destiny, the scent of fate woven into blood. They were beautiful not because the gods valued beauty, but because beauty inspired awe and fear in equal measure. They were terrifying not because they chose to be, but because terror made mortals kneel, and kneeling mortals were easier to judge. From the first moment she opened her eyes, she had known her purpose: to serve Odin's hunger for the worthy dead. But she had not understood the cost. The Allfather's expectations were carved into the marrow of creation itself. Valkyries were to be cold, precise, indifferent to suffering, unless the suffering revealed worth. They were to weigh lives with the calm of a judge and the ruthlessness of a butcher. They were not to question, not to hesitate, not to feel sympathy for those who did not meet the criteria he had set. Odin himself rarely explained these criteria. He shifted them according to his needs, his plans, his paranoia, his endless preparation for Ragnarok. Worthiness was simply whatever served him at the time. She had accepted this for centuries. It was harder to accept now that she had broken it. Her sisters sensed the fracture in her long before she spoke of it. They did not ask questions. Questions were dangerous, but they observed. Valkyries noticed everything. They saw how she lingered too long over certain deaths, how she descended too slowly into battlefields where her presence should have been swift and decisive. They saw how she avoided meeting their eyes when they returned to Valhalla together, her shoulders carrying a tension that did not belong to beings supposedly above fear. Some of them pitied her. Others feared being associated with her. A few felt a faint, disquieting thrill at her disobedience, not because they wanted to rebel, but because rebellion exposed the vulnerability they themselves tried to forget. Punishment for a Valkyrie did not come in the form of chains or whips, or the crude cruelties mortals used on one another. Odin preferred punishments that reshaped identity, that carved obedience deeper than pain ever could. The stories whispered through Asgard told of Valkyries stripped of their wings, condemned to walk the earth as mortal women until death claimed them with no promise of return. The Sagas softened these tales into tragic romances, beautiful maidens falling in love, losing their immortality, weeping over warriors they had once carried to glory. The truth was crueler. A stripped Valkyrie did not simply lose her powers. She lost memory of flight, sense of purpose, ability to see souls clearly. She became trapped in the fragile body of a human, feeling fear for the first time. Hunger, injury, loneliness, things that struck harder than any blade. She would hear echoes of the sky she once owned, but never again reach it. Some punishments were even worse. Odin, master of runes and binding spells, could sever parts of a Valkyrie's nature without destroying her entirely. A rebel could lose her ability to choose the dead, turning her into a silent observer condemned to witness suffering without the power to intervene. Others were forced into service not in Valhalla but in Hell's mists, guiding souls not of the brave, but of the forgotten, those who died nameless, terrified, unclaimed. A Valkyrie once radiant would drift through cold shadows for eternity, knowing she would never again hear the thunder song of warriors rising. The cruelest punishment, however, was also the quietest. Odin could remove a Valkyrie's ability to feel anything at all. She would continue to ride, to choose, to carry souls, but the process would become mechanical. Her heart would be silenced. She would become perfect, cold, efficient, obedient, an empty vessel shaped into a weapon. To lose emotion was to lose the last fragment of self that separated a Valkyrie from a tool. She had always feared that last punishment more than death. Death to an immortal was a concept without teeth. But the death of self, the erasure of will, the hollowing out of purpose until nothing remained except duty, that was terror. That terror now followed her in every flight. When she rode above battlefields, she felt not only the screams of the dying, but the weight of Odin's unseen gaze. She could not shake the sense that he was testing her, waiting to see whether she would make another forbidden choice. Her hands trembled when she reached for souls. She second-guessed every instinct. She wondered whether mercy had been a dangerous mistake or a revelation she could no longer ignore. But it was not mercy alone that had compelled her. It was doubt, something forbidden to her kind. Doubt poisoned certainty. Doubt cracked faith. Doubt opened the door to questions no Valkyrie should ask. Why must worth be measured only in violence? Why must the brave serve in death the god who had orchestrated their doom in life? Why must Valkyries carry the weight of Odin's ambition while being denied the right to shape their own fates? The more she asked, the more she realized the truth at the core of her existence. Valkyries were not servants of glory. They were servants of a system built on cycles of war, sacrifice, and exploitation that fed Odin's power and prepared him for the final battle he feared more than anything. Her disobedience had not simply violated a command. It had threatened the architecture of power itself. Rumors began to reach her from unexpected places. Ravens circled her more often than before, watching her with a scrutiny bordering on contempt. Shadows shifted when she walked alone. She heard whispers in languages older than the Aesir, speaking of a chosen disobedience, of a thread pulled out of place. Even the Norns seemed to glance toward her when she passed, their eyes unreadable, as if considering whether her defiance had opened a crack in fate they had not woven intentionally. She felt increasingly alien among her sisters. Their faces, once familiar, now seemed carved from ice-cold, distant, unwilling to risk association with someone marked by divine displeasure. The sky above her flights felt heavier. Storms built faster. Lightning followed her mount without striking, yet something else stirred within her, faint but persistent, a sense of clarity she had never known. For the first time in centuries, she questioned not only the rules but the reasons behind them. She saw warriors differently, not as pieces in Odin's future war, but as men shaped by loss, desperation, fear, and love. She noticed women grieving beside fallen bodies, children searching battlefields for fathers who would never rise, old men praying for daughters taken by raiders. She saw suffering, and instead of dismissing it as mortal weakness, she recognized it as something the gods had long ignored. Her disobedience had opened her eyes. But open eyes were dangerous in a world ruled by a god who demanded blindness disguised as loyalty. She did not know when the punishment had begun, only that the wind had changed. It no longer sounded like winter scraping over stone. It whispered like something alive, something watching. She felt it move through her braids, cold as the breath of the dead, and understood that whatever Odin had unleashed upon her was not meant to wound her flesh. It was meant to dismantle the foundations of what she believed she was. The forest around her twisted as if reacting to her presence, branches bending with a groan that resembled mourning. The ground had turned soft and black, absorbing her steps without echo, as though even the earth refused to acknowledge her existence. Valkyries were meant to be luminous beings, radiant in battle, visible on the edges of death like distant, burning stars. Now she walked as though made of smoke, fading at the edges, increasingly unsure if she was still part of the world she once served. She called the Allfather's name once only, once, because the moment the syllable left her throat, the sky itself recoiled. Thunder did not answer. Instead, silence descended with the weight of a verdict. She understood then that Odin's punishment was not noise, not fire, not blade. It was removal, a stripping of meaning, a dissolution of identity so complete that even the elements denied her. If a Valkyrie's essence was glory, then to erase her from recognition was worse than any wound she could imagine. A figure moved through the fog. For a heartbeat she thought it was one of her sisters, come to find her, come to fight for her before the father of battle sealed her fate completely. But the silhouette was wrong, too still, too heavy, the posture more like stone than flesh. When it stepped into view, she realized it was a warrior's spirit, one she had once chosen long ago on a distant battlefield. A man whose final breath she had carried like an offering through the smoke. His eyes were hollow now, emptied of purpose, wandering without direction. She approached slowly, whispering his name, but he did not turn. He walked past her as if she were invisible. This was Odin's cruelty, not tormenting her with horrors, but exposing the unbearable truth that she no longer held the power she once embodied, that the dead she had gathered, honored, and guided for centuries no longer recognized her, that she had become a shadow cast by a flame long extinguished. Her entire existence had been defined by the choosing, by the lifting of spirits, by the promise of glory. Now she could extend her hand and touch nothing. The world of the slain closed itself against her. She walked for what felt like seasons, though time in the realms had begun to warp. She saw battlefields frozen in the moment before death struck, warriors caught in silent tableau that stretched without motion. She saw halls she once entered with thunder beneath her feet now sealed like tombs. She saw her sisters gliding overhead through streaks of cloud, not seeing her, not hearing her, their wings beating in the rhythm she once shared, watching them without being able to reach them, carved deeper into her than any blade sharpened by dwarven stone. The invisible chain tightening around her chest was not forged of metal, but memory. The punishment worked slowly by turning her greatest pride into a mirror she could no longer bear to face. A Valkyrie stripped of glory was not merely diminished, she was unmade. Yet the Allfather's retribution was not complete. The true design of his punishment revealed itself when she reached the border of a realm she had never been permitted to enter. The threshold of hell. The gate groaned when she approached, shifting open without command or ceremony, as if the realm of the forgotten recognized her more than the halls she once served. The cold that spilled out was not wind or winter, but something deeper, crawling through the veins with the slow certainty of rot. And when she stepped inside, shadows stirred, not with malice, but with hunger for acknowledgement. They gathered around her, the unchosen dead, those who had perished without honor, without witness, without warrior songs to carry their names. The dead no one remembered, their eyes, dim and searching, fixed on her as though sensing a sliver of the divine still clinging to her. She wanted to tell them she could not lift them. She wanted to kneel and ask forgiveness for never having come for them, but the truth pressed upon her like an unseen hand. Odin had cast her down to the place where her wings, her strength, her authority meant nothing. The weight of centuries pressed against her. She saw faces that might have been saved if she had chosen differently, if she had fought harder, if she had not served a god who valued obedience more than compassion. It was a cruel revelation, that in punishing her, Odin forced her to witness the full cost of the system she upheld with blind devotion. Whispers began to gather around her, soft and dissonant. Fragments of memories from the forgotten dead. Laments, regrets, names. She felt them brush against her, not reaching for help, but recognition. They did not hate her. They did not blame her. They simply existed in silence so deep it swallowed identity whole, and she realized that Odin's punishment was not exile, it was truth. The truth that the glory she had believed in was built atop a mountain of those who had been denied, that even the most radiant Valkyrie was complicit in the machinery of fate the Allfather had engineered, that choosing heroes also meant abandoning countless others to darkness. The revelation carved through her like a blade of ice. She understood now why the Allfather withheld his wrath for so long. He waited until the moment pride crystallized fully within her, then shattered it with the force of reality, a punishment of understanding, a burden of memory, a mantle heavier than any armor she had worn in countless battles. She sank to her knees not from pain, but from the crushing enormity of what she was being forced to confront. In hell's dim glow, she felt the presence of something far older than Odin, something observing silently, evaluating the unraveling of one of his chosen daughters. It was not a comforting presence. It was not hostile. It was simply watching, as if curious to see what remained after divinity had been scraped away. The dead parted as she moved deeper, following paths carved by despair yet strangely familiar. She understood now that her journey was not wandering. It was descent. A deliberate path carved by Odin's hand, forcing her to travel through every truth she had ignored. Her fall was not accident but design. But even in her unraveling, faint embers of defiance remained. A flicker of something he had not managed to extinguish. She did not know whether it was hope or rage, but it pulsed quietly like a heartbeat refusing to surrender. She stood again. The shadows murmured behind her, not in warning but in acknowledgement. And somewhere far above, in a hall of golden wolves, Odin felt it. A shift. A spark he had not planned for. He turned his one eye toward the lower realms, the corner of his mouth tightening, not in fear but in interest. The punishment had begun to take shape. But what it would create he had yet to decide, and neither had she. She reached the deeper chambers of hell as the dim glow drained from the walls. Shapes moved in the periphery, drifting like torn banners caught in slow currents of mist. Here even shadows seemed tired. The despair was not dramatic or violent, but ancient, patient, and settled like frost over centuries. The forgotten dead did not cry. They did not rage. They did not speak. They simply existed in a silence that pressed so heavily upon her that her bones felt it. For the first time in her long existence, the Valkyrie wondered what she truly was without Odin's will behind her. She had been forged by command, molded by expectation, and praised only when she served perfectly. She had never chosen her fate, she had only enforced his. She had carried warriors to the halls of glory without ever asking who decided what glory meant. She had punished those who violated oaths Odin himself twisted, She had followed commands with the same unquestioning obedience she now saw reflected in the hollow eyes of the forgotten dead. A figure emerged from deeper fog. This one was not like the others. It stood straighter, carried itself with a dignity that did not match the decay around them. When the mist peeled back from its face, she recognized a warrior she had once denied passage to Valhalla centuries earlier, a man who had died holding the broken body of his child, slain in a raid that the Sagas never recorded. His eyes were not empty. They burned, not with anger but with clarity. "You," he said, the word rippling through the chamber like a thread pulled taut. "You turned from me." She felt the weight of that truth. She had seen him on the battlefield, blood-soaked, exhausted but unbroken, a man who fought not for conquest but for home, for family, and she had turned away because Odin had commanded that only warriors who died for his wars were worthy. She had obeyed. And here he stood, condemned to the realm where memory went to die. "I was not allowed," she whispered, though the words felt hollow even to her. He stepped closer until his presence was a cold that felt almost personal. "You were allowed everything except disobedience. Is not the same thing." The sentence cut deeper than any blade forged by dwarves. She had never questioned her role, never examined the demands placed upon her. But here, in the stillness of a realm untouched by the songs of skalds or the vanity of gods, truth had room to grow like a root seeking cracks in stone. The warrior's face soft, not in forgiveness, but in recognition of the suffering she now bore. "This place is not punishment," he said. "It is where truth settles when gods refuse to look at it." She swallowed, her throat raw from silence. "And what am I meant to do with this truth?" His answer was simple. Carry it. The simplicity of it terrified her, because she felt what it meant. Odin's punishment was not to destroy her. It was to transform her into something he did not anticipate. He had cast her down to break her, to bury her in the ruins of the system she had upheld. But by forcing her to face the consequences of obedience, he had accidentally given her something even gods fear: understanding. The warrior stepped back, dissolving into the fog as gently as breath fading in winter. She tried to call after him, but the mist swallowed her voice. The dead receded, leaving a path she had not seen before, one carved with neither stone nor intention, but necessity. She followed it, the cold whispering against her skin, as though hell's walls themselves exhaled around her passage. The corridor narrowed until she reached a chamber lit by no visible source. In its center sat a throne of bone, not sculpted but grown, as if formed from the accumulated remains of forgotten names. And upon it sat Hel herself, daughter of Loki. Half beautiful and half rotten, her duality a reminder that all myths contained truths no god could sanitize. Hel regarded her not with malice, but with interest, cold, measured, ancient. "A fallen Valkyrie," Hel murmured, her voice echoing as though spoken both near and infinitely far. "How curious. Odin's punishments rarely drift this deep." The Valkyrie lowered her gaze but did not kneel. Kneeling was for the obedient. And obedience had been the first chain Odin had wrapped around her. "Do you know why you are here?" Hel asked. "Yes," the Valkyrie whispered. "It's because Odin wanted me to see what I ignored." Hel tilted her head, the beautiful half of her face unreadable, the decayed half twitching faintly. "And have you seen?" "I have." Her voice cracked, not from fear but from the weight of revelation. "And I will not forget." The shadows inside Hel's chamber stirred. A faint hum trembled through the air, like the beating of wings long buried beneath earth. Hel leaned forward slightly. "Then your punishment is complete," Hel said. The Valkyrie blinked in confusion. "Complete?" Hel's dark eyes narrowed, not hostile, but piercing. "Punishment is only effective when it reveals. Pain shapes. Truth transforms. Odin sought to break you, but you have not broken." The Valkyrie felt a faint flicker inside her chest. Something small but burning. Something Odin had not extinguished. "Go," Hel said, lifting one skeletal hand. "The Allfather awaits your return." A door formed behind the Valkyrie, not a door of wood or stone, but of shifting light and shadow, as though reality itself offered her a path out. She stepped through it without looking back. Not out of fear, but out of conviction. The realm shifted around her. When she emerged again, she stood on the roots of Yggdrasil, beneath skies that churned like storm clouds smothered by twilight. Odin awaited her, ravens perched on his shoulders, the wind tightening around him like a cloak. He studied her with his single eye sharp, expectant, searching for the fracture he believed he had carved into her. But what he found instead was something he had not foreseen: determination, not rebellion. It's not submission. Determination. "You return," Odin said. I return with truth, she answered. He stepped closer. And what will you do with it? She lifted her chin, remember, and carry what you wished me to ignore. For the first time in centuries, Odin's expression shifted. Not anger, not pride, something in between. Something uncertain. Then your wings are restored, he said. But when she felt them unfurl behind her, she realized something profound. They were not the same wings she had lost. They were forged not by obedience, but by truth, by memory, by weight, by the stories of the forgotten dead she would never abandon again. She rose into the sky, not as Odin's instrument, not as a flawless chooser of the slain, not as a goddess untouched by consequence, but as a witness, a bearer of what had been buried, a Valkyrie who understood the cost of glory. And as she ascended, Odin watched, not victorious, not threatened, but contemplative. The punishment he had crafted to break her had shaped something he could no longer fully control. A Valkyrie who remembered, a Valkyrie who saw, a Valkyrie unbound. And in the halls of gods and men, such beings were far more dangerous than the fiercest warrior destined for Valhalla. If you want to continue uncovering forgotten truths in the brutal histories buried beneath glorified myths, remain here for the next descent into the shadows of the Viking world. Stories like this were meant to be erased, but together we can carve them back into memory, one revelation at a time.